Hello and welcome to the Cup of Triathlon podcast. We're brought to you every week by our sponsors, oxygenaddict.com.
For top online triathlon coaching.
We are bikehouse.co.uk.
All your cycling needs.
And raceforce.co.uk.
Takes your bike to races across Europe and gets it there safely.
And I'm with the wonderful Helen Murray, and we're finally on air. How are you, Helen?
Hi, Rob. Yeah, I'm fine, thank you, and I'm loving the change of clocks.
Oh, yeah. Bit of sunlight in the evenings makes a big difference, doesn't it?
Oh, it's confusing. You sort of, I don't know, faffing about at 5 p.m, you think it's 5, and then it's still light, and it's more like 7. It's amazing.
Not loving the hailstones that came down a little while ago when I was out running, though.
Hey, they're not going to be around for much longer.
Oh, I hope not.
It won't be. It's all good.
I just had a look at the forward-going weather forecast, and it's like 8 degrees, 9 degrees for about all the way into May. I kept going forwards, going, it's got to warm up soon, surely.
Oh, they just put average temperatures up, don't they?
Yeah, they've got to be guessing that far
exactly,
ahead. We
after
did a heat wave,
5,
don't we?
Yeah, totally. I'm in a happy holiday mode, by the way.
You're off on your holes, aren't you, in about, a day or so?
In about, less than 24 hours, I will be in the sunshine of Cyprus.
That is absolutely brilliant news. I'm very excited for you. And you're racing while you're over there, aren't you, as well?
Hilariously. We're doing the Ironman Olympic distance triathlon.
Brilliant. Does that involve, drinking shots and going round and round a baseball bat on the beach and trying to snog somebody?
Right, so it's drinking shots in transition. Then I think when you finish coming down the finish chute, you have to do big fish, little fish, cardboard box apparently.
Spreading extra stereotypes since 2016.
Oh, and then in the goodie bag, by the way, you get glow sticks.
Awesome.
Yeah. You can't
go far wrong with a glow stick, can you?
No, that is all a load of rubbish. But I'm really looking forward to it, actually. Should be quite good fun, and the weather looks around about low 20s, so should be nice. What's
the standard of competition like in the Ironman International Olympic Distance race?
I have no idea, but if it's
Is it kind of locals only, or is it you're going to get some ITU hotshots showing up?
Oh, I don't think there'll be ITU hotshots showing up, but I think there will be a lot of very fast people because it's obviously a lot of military bases in Cyprus, so I imagine a lot of fast people will be having.
Oh, good. Yeah. Quality race then.
Well, who knows? We'll soon find out, won't we?
We certainly will.
I'll report back.
Right, let's go over with a little bit of triathlon news and results from this weekend, or triathlon and, as it turns out, ultra running results from this weekend, hey?
Oh, yeah.
Bits and bobs going on. Not too much huge racing around the world, nothing international that we've seen, but over in the UK we saw the old Scottish Duathlon Championships taken out by Fergus Roberts and Nikki Bartlett, friend of the show, Nikki Bartlett.
Yeah, a really, really good win for Nikki as well, so that was fantastic. Fergus Roberts took the win on the guys' side in 1:57. He's from redvenom.co.uk Tri Club. His first
took down Fraser Cartmel.
I know. Did you see his first run? He did a 34:58 first run for the 10k.
That's shifting, isn't it?
That's good.
Put a minute and a half into Fraser. That is going well. Fraser's previously 5-time Scottish champion, apparently.
I know. So that's a blinking good result there for Fergus.
Chapeau, Fergus. We appreciate a good performance here. Well done, young man.
Fist bump of joy. He did a 17:48 second run.
Wow.
No one else ran a 17, so absolutely fantastic. So he finished 1:57.57. Fraser Cartmel did 2:01.23, about a minute ahead of Ewan Taylor, who did 2:02. And then as we were saying, friend of the show, our first ever interviewee, wasn't she, Nikki?
She was, 66 episodes ago, Nikki Bartlett.
So she was 14th overall.
You know, I always think of the West Wing when we say that, because it was the president's name in the West Wing. I always think, is it the president's daughter?
I don't think she is.
I don't think she's the president's daughter, no. But a bit of a tussle with Alice Hector took Alice down, 2:12 in second place, and Claire Cooey in third in 2:16. Yeah. So it looks like they had a good battle, and Nikki laid it down on the bike, apparently.
Yeah, did she do 1:08 on the bike?
Yeah.
Which is... Yeah, so and Alice did a 1:12 on the bike, so I do think, as you say, they did have a really, really good ding dong, and And then I think, yeah, because Alice did a faster 5k at the end. She did a 19:38 to Nikki's 20:29. But I think Nikki had put sufficient time into her on that bike. And Rob, I think it's the duathlon course up there is just like really, really tough. And you can imagine it probably was pretty chilly and really muddy and just really, yeah, like a true...
Really Scottish.
Yes, exactly. So great racing by all up with it. Sterling Triathlon Club organised that one, don't they? So fab.
Good stuff there. And we also had a big event locally. Obviously, if you're an international listener, this isn't going to be big at all, but there's an ultra distance race near where we live this weekend called the Liverpool to Manchester, which is, as it sounds, start running in Liverpool first thing in the morning at 6 a.m. and finish running when you get to Manchester 50 odd miles later, or 48 miles later as it turns out. So loads of our club mates from Knutsford were doing this event and been building up for it for a while. A bit of banter in the lead up with the boys and girls, seeing who was actually going to make it to the finish line or not. And the good news from Knutsford Tri Club's position was it was overall won by none other than Matt Rushbrook from Knutsford Tri Club in an amazing time of 6 hours 18, which for 48 miles is not too shabby.
He's that's like 8-minute miles, isn't it?
Yeah, average of 8-minute miles.
That's impressive.
Yeah, I had a chat with Rushy yesterday. Took out the first marathon in just a shade over 3 hours, just to give himself a bit of space. Gritted his teeth, closed his eyes, and hung on for the rest of the way. So I think he ended up averaging 8-minute miles, and it got a bit ugly towards the end. But I think it got a bit ugly for everybody. So yeah, good old win there. 6 hours 37 for James Schofield in second, 6:47 for Dan Miller in third, and Dave Clamp as well, another previous interviewee on the show.
Dave,
yeah, 56 years old in 7 hours 10, taking fourth place overall, which is very impressive indeed, isn't it?
That's everybody who did that run. I was so inspired by, because I know every weekend there are races going on across the country, but I guess when you see people close to you doing it, so club mates and things, who have trained their backsides off, some potentially more than others, but everyone getting round, I just think it's quite inspiring. You know, they've all got kids, they've all got families, they've all got life going on as well, and I do really think that kind of achievement, to run 47 miles, you know.
It's a long way, man.
Exactly, it is. It's
a long way in a car.
Totally.
Let alone on foot. I mean, to look at the business end of 6 hours to 12 hours of running, or running and walking and painful walking as well. That's the thing, isn't it? It's a real long way out there.
Exactly.
And if you're in pain, and like a lot of the guys were saying yesterday, race didn't go to plan, had to grit my teeth, I was in tears when no one was looking.
Oh.
So yeah,
those dark moments when you're, mile 38 or something, thinking, oh God, still got pretty much 9 miles to go, which is still quite a long way when you're that far into a race. But it was really, just great to see everyone come through it and finish it. But the other thing was, Rob, that I don't think it was amazingly marked out, was it? So you also had to carry a map and do a bit of navigation with it, which kind of added to the fun of it.
Yeah, and a few people got markers moved on them and they got lost at the end, and I think it was all part of the fun from what people said. But I don't know, mate. 45-mile marker of a run, you want to know where you're going, I think, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
I think
totally.
The organisers can sharpen up a bit there next year.
Put a few more markers out.
Few more at the back end. Ladies' results, we had Caroline Farron in 8 hours exactly. Second place in 8:14, Amy Burdis. And in third place in 8:26, Amanda Frodsham. And we have to give a shout out to Nikki Chamberlain from Knutsford Tri Club as well, bless her, who was in second place in the ladies' race, got completely lost and ended up outside McDonald's in Manchester asking for directions to the rugby club.
Oh,
God
no.
bless her. Yeah.
Oh, nightmare. And by that point, your brain your brain is absolute mush.
Brain switched off, nearly at the finish, and spent an hour trying to find the finish line. So heartbreaking.
Gutted.
But she'll be back. She'll be back for Comrades in another month and a half's time.
Amazing. Rob, what's the furthest you've ever run?
Marathon. Never done any further than a marathon.
Wow. Would you want to?
Could
be tempted.
You know what? Yeah, I'd love to go and do an ultra. I'd love to go and I'd love to go and do that one that's in the lakes in October. The Run the Lakes in a Day one.
That looks amazing.
It does, but here's the thing. I'm saying this now, sitting here in my comfy chair. I've never, at the end of a marathon, knowingly thought to myself, I fancy another 25 miles now.
I agree with you. However, I just think it's a totally different mindset and a different mentality.
Yeah, you've got to go out with a different mentality, haven't you?
And you're not going out sort of smashing out, I don't know, what would you be doing? 6.5 minute miles or something?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. Nah, slow it down a little bit. It is a different...
quite a lot, in fact.
Yeah, quite a lot, exactly. So it is a totally different ball game. But there we go. Well, maybe we will get onto that. So, Rob, our age group of the week, we did have a few nominations, didn't we?
Yeah, we did have a few nominations come through, but there can only be one winner this week, can't there?
Yeah, I think so.
The winner can only be Matt Rushbrook. I'm biased because he's a mate, but he's going to get it.
Good.
For running a 3-hour marathon and then holding on for another 25 miles.
Oh, man. Oh, that is a mental lesson right there, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is.
Wow.
I actually thought to myself when I saw the pacing, I was like, oh, this isn't going to be pretty at the end. Because you remember Rushy blew up, didn't he, quite badly at the end of the Warrington 40. Although he finished second overall there. Yeah. It was a not pretty last 10 miles for him.
No.
But look at that.
Yeah, no, held on. Oh, well chuffed. Well done, Matt Rushbrook then, age grouper of the week. Fantastic.
And who was our sponsor for age group of the week? Did you say it was going to be raceforce.co.uk this week?
I think it was raceforce.co.uk.
Do you need your bike taking out abroad, Helen? Are you going to fly with it in the plane with you?
This time I am, because it's not a race. It's not like a big race. But if I were to be going back to a big European race, I would get in touch with Raceforce.
You've used them, haven't you? Where did you go with them? Was it Austria?
Yeah, Austria. Yeah, 70.3s LMZ. Fantastic.
And what happened? Did you wander down on race morning and your bike's already built up for you? Is that what kind of happened?
No, when you get there, say I got there a couple of days before the race, and it was there built. So I think on the Thursday I was able to get it with the race on the Sunday, and then they offered, bike recce's and loads of other bits and bobs, and mechanics are there to make sure that it's all working.
Put together and finely tuned. That was always my worry, right? When I went to Holland, I remember this specifically, trying to put my own handlebars back on the TT bike.
Oh,
I just couldn't get them attached, and what had happened was the little hoodad that goes down the steering tube that you screw the nut into to hold them together had dropped down the steering tube, and I thought I'd broken my bike completely. And of course the mechanic dude at the race just did his thing with a bent spoke and pulled the hoodad back up again, and it was all fine. But it is nice to know that a professional mechanic's looked over your bike, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I remember the first time, it must have been like Ironman Austria or something like that, and I had taken it out myself, and then I was so worried that I hadn't done something properly or it wasn't quite right. So I got one of the, when you go to the expo and there's like Ironman people there doing the bike recce's, and you end up paying them like a ridiculous amount of money just for doing nothing.
Yeah, 50 quid. Please look over my bike. Give me some new cables. Yeah. Last minute panic.
Yeah. So if you are thinking about racing abroad, then get in touch with raceforce.co.uk. All listeners to the Cup of Tri receive 10% off all race tours, training weekends and bike transport services, excluding the bike bus standard service, and you can secure your booking for just £100. They offer payment plans, so it's really makes life simple if you're going to one of the bigger races in Europe, and they've got all of the race info on their website, raceforce.co.uk.
Great stuff. Now then, triathlon news this week. What's been going on in the triathlon world that isn't race results, Helen?
Well, one sort of semi is a bit of a race result, because that was the fact that Matt Bottrell, who I think we're going to have on in a week or so.
He's going to be on next week. Yeah. Tune in for news of Matt Bottrell.
Fantastic. Well, he did his first triathlon of ever, and he came second, so that was at East Leek a local one, I imagine. So fantastic.
Good result for your first triathlon. I think we should explain for international listeners, Matt Botchwell, if you haven't heard of him, is new to triathlon this year. He is previously national champion at time trialing, or multiple national champion. He's won something like 30 national championships, I found out when I was doing my preparation earlier on today. And he's ridden like a 45-minute 25 milers, and he's ridden 3:20 something for 100 miles. So obviously there's a lot of interest over here in the UK in him moving over to triathlon, because no one's sure what his swimming is like, but he's had some really good results in duathlons already. So his running is really solid, his biking is red hot. So we're looking to see how he goes in the 70.3s this year. So tune in next week for an interview with him.
Fantastic. So, yeah, Matt Bottrell got second. And then the other thing I've spotted over the past couple of days, Rob, is exciting news. Rachel Joyce is... she and her partner are expecting a baby. So that means there'll be no Rachel Joyce on the start line in Kona this year.
A baby Joyceinator.
Yeah. So September. That's exciting.
Due in September, hey?
Yeah. So
probably too much of an ask for her to get back in shape to order to race in Kona on the 4th of October, right?
Yeah.
It might not be the 4th, actually. Don't panic if you're going to Kona and think the date's different.
So
8th of October.
Yeah. So 2 bits of great news there.
Great stuff. So Joyce's kid will be racing in the same year as Chris's kid.
I know, it's great, isn't it?
We'll be separated by a year of age group. Just think, 25 years time.
Oh, be great, wouldn't it?
We'll still be doing the podcast then.
Who knows?
Who knows? We shall see.
Yeah.
Exciting times. Right, I think, Hells, we need to go over to our first interview of this week. First one we've got lined up for today, because it's one of 2, is an interview with a gentleman called Paul Burton. Have you heard of him?
I have. Pablo Burt, yep.
Pablo Burt on Twitter. Paul zoomed over to Kona in October of last year, had a fantastic performance. We're going to talk all about it. He ended up coming in 9:34 for what was probably his best ever Ironman performance. And it's a great interview because he worked for years and years and years to qualify, and then had what he considers to be his best race ever actually in Kona. So we caught up with him. Great interview, loads and loads of information. So I'll hand you over to the interview now. So it's great to finally have Paul on the show. Paul, thank you very much for agreeing to come on the show with us today. How are you doing, mate?
Not bad, thanks. Not bad.
It's a really good opportunity to get to talk to somebody who has been on a kind of long journey to get all the way to Kona, and when you got there, you were extremely successful. I'm a long-time follower of yours on Twitter. There's lots of interesting stuff has come up along the way, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners have followed you on Twitter as well, as is the case. That's the sad reality of the Ironman triathlete, isn't it? Either training or looking at Twitter a lot of the time. So listen, let's start off. Introduce yourself a little bit to the listeners and explain how you basically got yourself to Kona this year.
That's a long leading question.
It is a long leading question, isn't it? Yeah, give us the greatest hits of that one.
Well, so I'm Paul. I mean, I live in London. 35 this year. I guess I got into endurance sport about 10 years ago, and I started my career. I was doing finance and working some pretty long hours, and struggling to kind of get any kind of fitness routine into my life. And so with a mate, we entered a marathon just to try and give us a kick up the backside. So I kind of did my first marathon off no endurance sport background whatsoever. I've been sporty as a kid, but for kind of probably 10 years before then, my sport had been golf. So you don't need too much endurance and fitness for golf. I did my first marathon in 2005 in New York, and I did 3:34. And it's quite funny to be running Ironman marathons faster than that now, which is quite fun.
Yeah, so pretty solid debut overall, though. 3:30 marathons, nothing to be sneezed at. But
the first half was 1:35 and the second half was 1:59. So I think that gives you an indication of what my first endurance race is.
The classic baptism of fire, hey?
The second half of that marathon remains the most painful thing I've ever done in my entire life. So, anyway, so basically, I ran marathons for 2 or 3 years, and I got down to like 3:04, I think was my fastest. And so yeah, not bad, but certainly not great. Maybe we're guilty in the world of endurance sport and triathlon and social media of normalising some quite special stuff, but certainly 3:04 didn't feel pretty special. And then just got into triathlon as I was getting bored of running, really. And I think I did my first one in 2008, a couple of sprints, and then in 2009 I did a few Olympics. 2010 did my first Ironman, and it kind of went from there, really. So I think I've done 9 now.
So 9 Ironmans from the point you've done your first one to, finally punching the ticket. And I guess what we'll do is we'll skip forward a little bit in your story initially and kind of tell people you finally qualified this year at South Africa and had a really good race there, didn't you?
Yeah, it's a solid race. Yeah, solid race. Yeah, in end of March last year. Yeah.
Cool. And go through. Obviously, people have got different ideas about what a solid race is, but what were your splits? Give us an idea of where you ended up in your sort of triathlon journey to get yourself to Kona.
Well, I mean, South Africa's not a quick course, or the new South Africa's not a quick course. I did the old course in 2013 in 9:30, which is actually still my PB. But with the new course with the kind of hilly bike this year. So last year I did 59 swim. I can't remember what the bike was, like 5:25 or something like that on a tough course, and then I ran a 3:25 or 3:26 or something like that.
Solid. So you've get yourself to the point where you're a really strong all-around swim, bike runner, as you'd expect from someone who's qualified for Kona. Now, to contrast that, what was your first Ironman, and what kind of splits did you put out in your first Ironman?
So Frankfurt 2010, I did 10:40. And that's a quick course. So I did 1:07 swim. That was non-wetsuit. I was pretty pleased with that, actually.
Yeah, that's nasty on the ears when it's hot over there, isn't it?
5:27 on the bike, and then a 3:58 run.
Okay, and how did you what was your experience of that first Ironman then, in terms of you were already a decent swimmer, you're a very good biker, and you've got a bit of a running background, but how did that first Ironman day play out for you?
I guess it was what I hoped. I mean, I wanted to go under 11 hours. I was still pretty immature, kind of like as an athlete, like an endurance athlete. So it was. I was expecting it to be pretty hard, and it was, but. Yeah, I wanted to go under 11, and I did. I wanted to run probably 3:45, but the problem with Ironman, it's such a big thing to aim at and try and do, is you almost talk yourself out of it a bit. You're halfway on the run, and you're thinking, this is just the most ridiculous thing I've ever done. And when it starts to hurt, you back off, because of course it hurts.
Yeah,
I think
of course.
The key thing now, the difference is the mental approach to being able to race an Ironman, and actually knowing and expecting that it's going to hurt, and knowing how you're going to deal with that, and actually strangely looking forward to that. Whereas, like, I remember my first marathon when I started getting in New York, getting cramps in my quads and then hamstrings and then calves. I didn't expect that. I didn't know what it was, and it scared the hell out of me. Whereas once you get used to these things, you can really push your body a lot more.
Yeah, you mentioned a little bit earlier on about how in the endurance world we tend to normalize things that are not really normal at all, and that's a really good example, isn't it? For the majority of the population, if they get cramps in the quads and hamstrings, they're thinking, I need to sit down and maybe talk to a doctor.
Yeah.
And yet, when you're approaching an Ironman, especially on a hot day, it's kind of accepted par for the course.
Yeah, it's going to happen.
Yeah, there's a lot of people going in there thinking, well, if I get away with only having one bag of IV at the finish, it's been a successful day. So it is quite skewed away from normality, isn't it?
I've still never had an IV. I've asked a couple of times, but they've deemed me not worthy of it.
Oh, it's not a great experience. I've been really sick a few times, and it's not somewhere you want to go if you don't have to, man. Believe you me.
Yeah. I just wanted it for recovery, but there's a good reason why they don't let you have it.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. So you've got 10:40, obviously a really solid first Ironman there. I think a lot of people would be delighted with that after 2 or 3 attempts. And you mentioned, obviously the contrast is Frankfurt's a relatively quick course and South Africa's not, but you've still shown some real promise there. So what was the initial training you were doing for your first Ironman?
Oh,
Did you have much of a swim background as a kid? Because
And
obviously
no,
107 is a decent swimmer.
well, that's the little surprise, I guess, of my background, is that I've turned out to be a pretty decent swimmer with absolutely zero background. So um, that's helped. That really does help, because I've got mates that still struggle to swim under, say, a 115, and to be able to, I only swim 3 times a week, and I should be able to knock out a sub 55 swim this year, I think. So that helps. So no background at all in the swimming, but I mean, so back then I was just, I've always been sort of swimming, biking, and running about 3 times of each sport a week. A big difference back then, I was so scared of the distance that I remember with a mate of mine, Paul Dean, who you and some of the listeners may know, we kind of took up triathlon at about the same time. We did our first Olympics the same year. We did our first Ironman together. And we were going out riding 100 miles nearly every weekend, just because we were so scared of the distance that we felt we just needed to do that to get bike fit. And now I rarely, if ever, ride over 100 miles. Just knowing that you don't actually need to. But when you first approach it, you just get so scared of it that you end up doing stupid stuff like that.
It is funny, isn't it, if you go to the forums or on Facebook and you read the stories of people who are doing things like that, and just you can almost smell the terror in the things that they're writing. Just the overall sort of just getting psyched out by the event really is enough to drive you out training in the early days, isn't it? And do some crazy stuff like that.
Yeah, but also you see it in, I don't know, do you use Strava?
Yeah.
I mean, Strava's brilliant. I mean, now because I'm confident in what I'm doing with my coach and all that kind of stuff, that I don't get influenced by other people. But you could look at your Strava feed at the weekends and absolutely poo your pants about the volume some people are doing. It's very funny.
It is, absolutely. So, all right then, what do you, if anything, I mean, just to stay in the swim for a minute, what do you attribute your strong swim to? Did you get good coaching in the early days, or was it literally a case you got in the water and you had a pretty decent swim stroke right from the off?
No, it was, there was no natural ability. One of the best decisions I made with triathlon was, as soon as I think I'd done my first couple of sprints and thought, okay, I quite like this, then that winter I went and got endless pool video lessons with a guy called Ray Gibbs at Swim Canary Wharf in London. So I think for the next 3 years, so this is kind of probably winter 2008. For the next 3 years, I probably saw him 5 times each winter, kind of once a month from December through to like April. And that was absolutely vital of teaching me, because I never had the time to go to squads and stuff, so I just sort of swim when I could around my working week. But going to see Ray was really sort of, he ingrained in me, look, you've got to come over the winter. You've got to do all this drill work when you're not doing your speed work. You can't do all that volume until the technique is set. So that's what I did for 3 years. I saw him every winter once a month, and then I'd take those drills and work away at them for a month, go back and see him, see how it stuck. And then when you get to April and May and you start needing to add some swim volume, you've actually got something on which to add the volume.
It's great advice, that, isn't it? The ability to see yourself under the water is just so essential.
And I think actually, strangely, coming from a bit of a golfing background, that I knew what help video lessons were, so and the technique stuff. And I think swimming is just like golf, and there's no point going to the pool or the driving range and hitting balls or swimming lengths with bad technique, because all you get is pretty reasonable at really bad technique, and you're not going to make any breakthroughs. And this is the problem you see with a lot of runners and cyclists coming into triathlon. They think, well, I'll just go to the pool 3 times a week. I'll swim 15k a week and I'll get good. And it is absolutely useless unless you actually have some guidance.
Yeah, do you know, the point you make about golfers is a really good one, because I've had a lot of athletes come to me who've made the move to triathlon has become, I think, the new golf over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And people who've come from a golfing background, the idea of getting video analysis on your golf swing has been around for decades, hasn't it?
Yeah,
so
yes.
people come into swimming or into triathlon, and it just seems like a natural, well, I've been having lessons with a golf pro, so I'll have lessons with a triathlon coach or a swim coach and get videoed, and it is a very clever sort of way to progress really quickly, I think.
Yeah, I mean, especially with technology, it's actually really easy to do. And it's almost identical. I remember like having golf video and stuff. You look at yourself on video and go, oh, that looks terrible. I don't do that, do I? And then the same thing with swimming. You're like, I thought I had a good catch on my left arm, and I've just completely dropped my elbow. But then when you work at it and you see it, and it's only when you see it can you see what the coach is talking about.
Yeah.
So I think that's absolutely vital. And there's so many people that are swimming, people with great engines who are riding, 5 hours in an Ironman, and they can run a 3:15 marathon, but they're swimming 1:15 because they can't be bothered to get any technique work done.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so then, so we've got 9 Ironmans to play with here across from your very first one in Frankfurt all the way through to South Africa.
Let's do
And
these
obviously we're not
quickly.
gonna, yeah, we're not gonna go through all of them because people fall asleep as they're driving. But let's go through what were the greatest hits along the way, do you think?
I'll tell you what.
Like your best performances?
We'll go through them all real quick though. So Frankfurt,
Okay,
the first
cool.
one, 2010, and then I had a year off. Then I did Roth in 2012 and did 9:51. And that was the first one that made me think, okay, maybe at some point I could try and get to Kona. So I did Wales soon after Roth as a bit of a bonus end of year race. Had a good race, like 10:09. I think I was like 20th in the age group. And that was like, okay, yeah, I could maybe get there. And then what followed was 2 years of trying and failing miserably to qualify. So 9:30 at South Africa 2013, where I missed by one place. Bolton that year, where I completely exploded, having been second or third age grouper into T2. The more it rained, the more I walked. That was horrible. And then South Africa again the next year, 2014, where I DNF'd it because I got bronchitis on the plane over. And then,
that's awful luck, man.
well, we'll come back to that. Was it? I don't know. And then Sweden, I was in for Sweden after that in 2014. And I got sick in race week with the stomach bug, so I didn't start. So actually, the only Ironman I did in 2014 was Wales, which I'd never even wanted to do until I got back from Sweden, and I was like, I need a race. So I entered Wales. By the time I got there, I was just toast. But I did all right. I came 8th and missed out by one place again, so that was a bit of a tricky year. But then 2015 did South Africa in the spring again and qualified there. And then did Kona. So that was the greatest hits quickly.
So that's, I mean, you've had some really bad luck along the way there, haven't you? With getting ill and getting sick a couple of times and missing a slot by one place each time, things like that. So it must have been getting to the point for you where it was. Did you start to think it was maybe not going to happen for you?
No, I mean, I'd always kind of made peace that it's a hard thing to do and you may not qualify. So I was always trying to make sure that I was enjoying it, and I always was. So I loved training, I loved the racing, I loved doing it with my friends. So that was, I didn't ever really feel like giving it up. You do pull your hair out a bit, but I enjoyed it. I mean, on the bad luck thing, I think that if you take a step back, and the reason why 2015 was a much better year than 2014, I just took much better care around all of the non-sport stresses. So getting sick twice in 2014 was probably entirely related to my training and life. So I'm not sure it was bad luck, but you learn.
Yeah, so do you think it was I mean, I often talk to my athletes about this. We use Training Peaks and it gives you the old training stress score. I think what everybody really needs is a life stress score.
I've been thinking,
you know what I mean? A graph that says your boss has done this to you and you've had to work these hours and your baby's been awake in the night and things like that.
Exactly.
Is that something that you really feel like the external stress is something that needs managing as much as the training does?
100%, and that's the stuff that I've been working on with my coach James is all of this stuff, and completely. Like this is where Training Peaks and Strava and stuff are dangerous because one person may be entirely capable of training 20 hours a week, and another person absolutely the maximum they can do for peak performance is say 12 hours a week. Maybe the same capability athletically, but they can't do the same things if life is set up differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, you've mentioned your coach, James, a couple of times. It's James Beckinsale, isn't it?
Yeah.
How long have you been working with him for?
This is our 3rd year.
Okay. And so let's talk a little bit about your coaching journey then. What differences have you seen through that 3-year period of working with him?
Well, we've worked together 2 years. This is the 3rd year. He's had a massive impact on my training, and as much the kind of mental approach to racing and Ironman. So I think that the first year with him was really kind of getting to know each other, really. But the other thing really, what he did a lot of that I hadn't really had before was real kind of in-person technique coaching, particularly around running actually.
Okay.
And I had been for sure underperforming in the run in Ironman and all of my racing relative to my kind of engine and my swim and my bike. And so we've done a lot of technique work around that. So that's been a major thing. But it was interesting. I mean, I listened to the interview with Matt Dixon that you did a few weeks ago. And I mean, the stuff that James talked about and like, the stuff work we do together is almost entirely along those same lines of managing your kind of structure of your season diligently, really making sure you're getting the rest and recovery built into not just your training week, but also your season and your year. And then really kind of all of those soft things, like all the stuff that I remember Matt saying on that interview, the stuff that's free, the sleep and the nutrition, and it's just decision making. And it's amazing in triathlon and endurance sport that there's a lot of quite bright people are doing it. As a group of people, we're astonishingly poor at decision making to be good at your sport.
It's that line, isn't it, about you're the dumbest bunch of smart people I've ever met.
It is amazing. And it's the stuff that we all used to do. It's going on an easy training line and smashing each other up the hills, and it's not getting enough sleep, and it's overtraining when you shouldn't be. All the obvious stuff. So working with James has been great, and he's had a massive impact. So yeah, it's been really good.
Great stuff. Well, let's go on and talk about Kona itself this year then, because I'm really keen to find out about how your experience was over there, because I know it wasn't just you. You ended up over there with a bunch of mates, didn't you, from your club and people you trained with and stuff. So let's talk about the Kona experience.
Sure. Far away.
So first up, like the thing everyone says and the thing you notice, you get off the plane and it just feels hot and humid, right? How did you adapt with the heat and humidity?
Well, I was prepared for it. So I'd actually, from a sort of physiological point of view, been in my last 2 or 3 long runs I've been doing in layers. I'd done quite a lot of sauna stuff in the sort of month before, so building up 5 minutes at a time. And then the main thing you can really do around heat acclimatization is get out there early. Any more than 2 weeks is there's no extra benefit. So as long as you're out there more than a week early, you adapt. So that's it really. I mean, it's hot, but no one should be surprised when they go to Kona and find out that it's hot.
Yeah. That's a very good point. And then race week itself, being around the town and the atmosphere and all that stuff, how did you find Kona as an experience?
Oh, I loved it. I had a great time. As you said in the intro there, doing it with mates is awesome. So, and I went out there with, race-wise, I went out there with sort of no real expectations. So I could really enjoy, if you go out there expecting to podium or go under 9 hours or whatever it might be, then it's probably a bit of a stressful experience. But I went out there with mates and we had a great holiday, made sure we didn't do anything that would hinder our race. But, we did all the Parade of Nations and the Underpants Run and, did some training on the course and swam at Digny Beach and caught up with friends for coffee at Lava Java, all the stuff that you see everyone banging on about on Twitter and stuff. So, yeah, no, it was awesome. Really loved it. And importantly, I think having taken so long to get there, I knew when I did get there, I was quite comfortable with it and comfortable with who I was as an athlete and not being overawed by it all. You do see some funny things over there.
Like what? What did you think you saw there?
The level of nude running up and down a Leahy Drive with sort of six packs and flexing and the general narcissistic parade that goes on is hilarious.
It sounds like you managed to keep your head out of that a little bit. So talk us through the race itself then. Obviously, we'll spoil... Well, I'm not going to spoil the ending, actually. Let's go through it from start to finish, and you can tell us how you got on and where you finished and stuff like that.
Fine. Right. I mean, the swim was... I'd put a lot of work into the swim, actually, and I'd kind of upped my swim volume and really done it in a pretty smart way with James, and we'd done a lot of work on that kind of starting really fast, because it was always about, I'm a decent swimmer, not a great swimmer, so it was always about, we did a lot of stress work on really fast starts in training and then settling into race pace, and then that just happened perfectly. So yeah, I hit the first 300 meters really, really hard, almost like a time trial. And then the strategy was to jump on good-looking feet and do not let them go, which worked a treat.
Okay, and then
I think it's known to be it's meant to be long. I think it's meant to be between 4 and 4.1k. So a non-wetsuit 59 was definitely a good swim for me.
Yeah, sure. And then you got out of the water and found yourself sitting down opposite one of your training partners, right?
Well, I was jumping on the bike with Charlie, to Charlie Pennington, who I'd been in Lanzarote with for a week, about a month before. And Charlie's a better swimmer than me, so I was pretty chuffed. I think he was pretty pissed off to see me, but that's life, Charlie.
We had Charlie on the show a couple of weeks ago, actually, so it'll be interesting to get your take on how this played out as well. So out onto the bike then, and I know you guys didn't see each other much when you were out there, did you?
No, so we got to the mountain line together, and it turned out that we sat next to each other at T2, but we didn't see each other for the 5 hours in between.
That's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we were together for the first 10 minutes, and we were in a nice little pace line, and there's a little wiggle around through town for the first kind of 15, 20 minutes. And we were together then. But there's a little out and back after about, 5k. And I knew I'd swum well, but I was thinking, well, the out and back's coming soon, but I've not really seen anyone coming in the other direction. And then the first couple of people started coming down, and then I could see the turnaround point. I was like, hang on, I'm sort of quite near the front of the race here. So I made a bit of a decision to put a little 5 to 10 minute effort in to get in amongst the best riders. And I'd been next to Charlie at that point, and so I kind of rode away from him for a little bit. You get up to the Queen K, and I kind of put my head down, and another mate of mine was nearby, so we worked together for kind of 20 minutes to get up to a couple of groups. And that kind of really made the ride a little bit. And Charlie was much more disciplined, stuck to his power numbers, and stayed where he was.
And so you've got yourself to Kona finally, and you end up basically riding at the front of the age group race. That must have been pretty exciting.
It was it was fun. And you're sitting there going, am I being a muppet here? Am I doing something stupid? But I felt good. My power numbers were in the right place. But I'd prepared for it. So, well, I'd thought about doing this. And actually, Sam Baxter, who's a mate of mine, I was caught up with him before I went out, and he kind of recommended that strategy to get away from the people, because there's such a strong field, and if you swim around sort of 62 to 65 minutes, there's just hundreds of people, and there are just drafting and pace lines, and part of it for me was actually to get away from a lot of that stuff so you could mentally enjoy the race rather than sitting there being worried about getting a penalty or having too many people around you. So yeah, just kind of get to the front, do about half an hour of work, and then settle into your power number and just ride your own race.
Cool stuff. And then I'm presuming that the turnaround at Harvey must have been quite an experience for you, being so close to the front of the race.
Yeah, no, it was cool. I mean, when we hit the climb, I kept it all sensible. So some people were powering up there at 290, 300 watts plus. So I was just kind of riding up there at about 250 just to keep it sensible. But I mean, I enjoyed the descent. I like descending, and it's a straight road, and you can go really fast with that tailwind. So I was saving myself on the way back, and most people was burning their matches on the way up.
Got you.
We had a nice little sort of rainstorm at Harvey. It's this complete microclimate, actually. It was cold and rainy.
Was it really cold? Properly cold?
Well, okay, probably not cold like it's going to be. I'm doing the Dam Buster tomorrow, and I've seen the forecast for snow, sleet, and 3 degrees. It won't be that cold.
I'm just thinking. I'm looking out the window here, and it's snowing currently. So yeah, it's probably not cold compared to Cheshire at the moment.
Yeah. So Harvey is a slight microclimate, and it was a bit windy and rainy, which is a bit weird.
Yeah, okay. So you said before you ended up in T2, Charlie's ridden back up to you, and you end up sitting opposite each other at that point then. But again, you're still really close to the front of the race, right?
Yeah, I think I got off the bike 18th in my age group, so that's 30, 34, So yeah, pretty. There was some studs up the road, but yeah, in the mix. It was nice.
Yeah. And then how was your run?
I was really pleased with the run. It was. I've done enough Ironmans in a great place at T2 to know that means nothing. But no, the run was great, and this is where I think James knew when I sort of came to him that I was a good sort of swim biker. So we've spent 90% of our efforts on the mindset and the physical preparation for the run. So I would have felt if I'd had a nice swim and bike in Kona and backed it up with a 4-hour marathon, I would have been letting both of us down pretty majorly. So I was ready for that one. Yeah, I enjoyed it in a strange, masochistic, horrible self-harm kind of way. It's sorry, that's a bit inappropriate.
I know what you mean, though. I think everyone listening knows where you're coming from.
Yeah, it's not a fun place, the Ironman run at times, and but no, it was really cool. It was good. It was so well. I was prepared for it to be hot, and it was really hot on the Leahy Drive. There was no wind, and it was just absolutely baking. So I told myself I was going to walk every aid station and just run comfortable in between. So I was probably running 4:30 pace when I was running and walking the aid stations. One thing I hadn't probably twigged is that there's an aid station every mile in Kona. So actually that's quite a lot of walking. So if I'm lucky enough to go back, I think I'll probably walk every other one.
And so you ended up running, what, were you just under 3:30 on the marathon in the end?
No, I 3:31 in the end. I was a bit disappointed at that. I think I was on track for a 3:22, 3:23 for the first half, and then you get to Palani and it's so blooming steep. And I said I was going to walk that, and it's quite long and steep. So you lose a minute or two by walking that. But I was so sort of expecting the energy lab was what everyone goes on about. So I was kind of really prepared for the energy lab, and that was what I was sort of gearing myself up for. But one thing you don't twig is it's a really long way from the top of the Palani on Queen K to the energy lab. So the energy lab itself was quite a nice little distraction, 3K or so. Then you've got to run back again. The Queen K is just a dual carriageway of rolling hills with zero shade, lots of wind, and no supporters. It's horrible.
Yeah, really long, barren, featureless.
Yeah, there's absolutely nothing nice and positive about it, other than that it's in the Ironman World Champs.
It must be the most difficult mentally kind of stretch of road to run on, where there's no markers, there's nothing to kind of gauge your progress, you can't see the other end yet.
Yeah, and you can't.
It must be very challenging.
I don't know, when you're sort of relatively quick at Ironman, when you're towards the front of a field, there's no one really around. And even, clearly, I think I finished 123rd or something. There's lots of people around you. You don't really see them when you're running in a straight line where everyone's running quite slowly. It's only when you get to the energy lab and you've got a little hour back that you realise that there's quite a few people around here. I need to pull my socks up and keep the pressure on. So I lost a bit of ground in that second half. I wanted to run under 3:30. I wanted to run probably about 3:20 on a perfect day, but it was quite hard.
Yeah, I'm sure. And so you've ended up, was it overall time 9:32? Is that right?
9:34.
9:34. And I guess at the standard like that, the few minutes plus or minus around there's quite a few people, right?
Yeah, quite a few, but they come thick and fast.
Yeah,
but you feel. I mean, I knew from the turnaround in the energy lab, and I knew from not many people overtaking me after that, other than Martin Muldoon, who's an Irish guy based in London who flew past me. I wasn't really being overtaken, and I knew I was in a good place off the bike, so I was like, hang on, this is pretty fun.
Yeah. And you ended up third Brit overall, and third age group Brit on the day, which is a fantastic performance, mate. We've got to say congratulations on that.
Thanks. Yeah, third age group Brit. I'll say that other than Charlie, I think the Brits probably underperformed. There should be more fast guys right at the sharp end than that, but I'll take it.
So listen, let's talk a little bit to wrap the interview up. Let's talk a little bit about your training, because I know everyone's always fascinated by the training that fast guys, especially fast guys who do well in Kona, have actually done, and assume that you'll be doing enormous volume week in and week out and working part-time. So what's the reality there for you?
What, in training hours?
Yeah.
I think so. How James and I look at an Ironman build as a 12-week build. So all the work before that is just training to train. So you're preparing yourself, and the key thing about that period before the 12 weeks is turning up fresh. So there's no point doing massive hours 16, 17 weeks out from your Ironman if that's going to mean you're knackered with 3 months to go. So that 12 weeks before Kona, I think I averaged 16 hours a week.
Okay.
And that includes, so I went on a week's training camp with Charlie to Lanzarote. But interestingly, I listened to your the podcast the other day where you were talking about your week in Fuerteventura.
Yeah, not to be used as an example.
Yeah, I was like, okay, so I went to Lanzarote with Charlie, I think 5 weeks out from Kona. I think I did about 24 hours of training, something like that. Charlie's similar, and we did most of our riding together, a bit of the swimming, none of the running. I don't run with Charlie; he's a bit of a freak. So even in a training week environment, not smashing it.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I think that'll raise a lot of eyebrows amongst the listeners, actually, that averaging 16 hours a week for the last 12 weeks. And I think I read on your blog you'd average sort of 12 to 14 hours a week in the build-up over the year before that as well. So yeah, I think it's not by any means crazy volume, is it?
No, so if I think about that kind of 12 weeks before the 12 weeks, that was probably 10 to 13 hours a week.
Yeah.
And that's what so I'm doing Austria this year, and the kind of 12 weeks to go starts in about 3 or 4 weeks. So I'm in that preparation phase again, and I'm training 11, 12, 13 hours a week.
Gotcha. Oh, that's really, really interesting.
But I'm not, and the key thing around here is I'm barely running over an hour. I'm not riding over 3.5 hours much, because that's all to come. You build that you build that periodization up towards the race, not the whole winter-based thing, I think, is rubbish.
Couldn't agree with you more there. I think it makes most sense to do your most specific training closest to the race, and so it makes most sense, doesn't it, to do your longer rides in the build-up and the shorter, harder stuff a bit further out if you're racing the long distance.
Yeah, so we do a lot of technique work at the moment, strength work at the moment, and then when the sort of 12 weeks to go starts, then that's the specific stuff so I don't do quite as much quick stuff, but you build up the strength endurance on each of the swim, bike and run. And the key thing with the sort of training plan that we do in that 12 weeks is just the progression. And it's a bit boring, but we do, there's 4 or 5 key sessions that we do most weeks, and they just get longer as it goes. So we start at 12 800s, and I do the 800s run track session every 2 weeks, and each 2 weeks I add 2 reps. So 12, 14, 16, 18, and the last one's 20 800s. Now, 12 800s at the kind of strength endurance pace is actually a quite easy session. 14's relatively easy. 16 gets a bit chewy, but you just got to build up to it.
It's a serious set, that 20 by 800. 20 by 400's a serious set. That's a real one to get your teeth into, mate.
Yeah, but I guess once you've done the 16 and the 18 and you've kind of like just about got to the end okay, the point of failure is stretched out by 2 reps each time you do it. So, yeah.
And what sort of pace will you run those 800s at, just as a matter of interest?
Sort
of relative to your goal Ironman race pace.
So I've been doing them. There's different ways you can do it. Historically, we've been going at I've been doing about 255s. So just 550 mile pace. So it's kind of around about a bit slower than threshold.
Yeah.
And that's the key thing. It's that strength endurance for Ironman rather than your real top end.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And so, looking forwards to the season that's coming, you've mentioned you're racing Austria. What would your ideal year be? Would you go back to Kona this year if you got the slot, or are you kind of having a year off?
I mean, Austria is the A race, so it's all about going fast at Austria.
That's the course to do it on, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a fast course. I mean, I've always avoided Austria in the past because I've been scrambling around the backwaters trying to qualify at what I deem easier qualification races. So having done Kona and had a really good experience, now I was like, okay, right, let's address the bucket list. But what Kona did teach me is that maybe I'm sort of better than I thought I was. So I'm going to Austria to try and go under 9 hours. And if I do that, then you should get a slot. And if I did that, I'd probably take it. Don't know. But it's not. The goal is to go fast. It's not to go there for a slot.
And I think probably that'll really help you out in terms of you'll have people around you that you can race at a course like Austria when you're around that 9 hours mark. Whereas in another race, if you tried to sort of go fast in inverted commas at Ironman UK, you probably wouldn't see anybody for half a mile in front or behind you during the marathon. Maybe.
Although when I did Bolton 2013, our age group was weirdly there were like 6 of us on top of each other, and no one else around for like 15 minutes. It was really weird. So that's the thing with Ironman racing. It's so random depending on who's there on the day.
You can never tell, I guess. Hey.
Yeah. But I'm really excited about having a crack at it in Austria. So I'm looking forward to sort of starting the proper training in a couple of weeks.
Great stuff. Now listen, just to wrap this up, have you got any tips you think you can pass on to the listeners who sort of want to follow in your footsteps and get to Kona in 3 to 5 years' time?
Oh, the thing that I guess we touched on it earlier, the thing that I hadn't realised 2 or 3 years ago was the non-training stresses that you're carrying in training and life and racing, and you've got to be really, really cognizant of those. So I was always fighting the alarm clock. When the alarm clock's going at 6 a.m, if it's a real struggle to get out of bed every day, then you're overreaching. And I kind of hadn't really realised, because you think, I've got to hit 15 hours this week, or I've got to run 40 miles this week. So it's really to drop the volume chasing, and you've got to train the right amount for what's sustainable in your life. And once you get that balance right with your work and your family and your friends and your training, then that's when you see the results.
That's a fantastic tip to leave it on. So listen, Paul, thanks ever so much for your time, mate. We really appreciate you coming on, and I'm really looking forward to watching the results of Ironman Austria this year, to hopefully see you with 8.xx after your name.
Exactly, I'll give it a crack.
Great stuff. Thanks again for your time, mate, and I hope to speak to you again soon.
Cheers, Rob.
Okay, Paul Burton.
Oh, Rob, I remember reading his race report after Kona, actually, and I just felt that is a really good race report because of the amount of work.
Link to it actually in the show notes.
Yeah.
On the webpage, not the show notes. Sorry, because it's a really good blog.
It is, isn't it? And just the amount of work that went into it, and I just love the fact that when I was reading it, I remember thinking, wow, he sort of totally surprised himself.
Yeah.
So.
And also he's one of the guys who I think, for a lot of people listening, they dream about qualifying for Kona, and then a lot of people do the work required to qualify for Kona and maybe get a bit of luck and help along the way to qualify, but he totally didn't. He missed out. So it's nice to see him finally get paid back by karma there, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I a little birdie, which I think we might be able to get some photos up actually of this one. A little birdie told me that she chicked him in London a couple of years ago. Laura Siddle chicked him.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So we have photographic evidence. We'll make sure that that's up as well somewhere.
All right, I'll leave that to you and your Twitter account.
Yeah, we'll sort that out. But no, absolutely great guy. So thank you.
Yeah. Now then, we got a second interview this week as well. Helen, tell us a little bit about this one.
So this one is with Dr. Tom Hughes, he runs trimechanics.co.uk, which is like running analysis, looks at your running gait as well. And I think we explained last week that Tom had got in touch with us because he heard that I was having a few problems with my foot, basically, and he said, let me look at your running and we can have a little chat about it. So we did, and you'll hear about that in the interview as well, but it's just really interesting, all of his thoughts about running and bodies and mechanics and how we work and how we function when we're running. So there's some fantastic tips in here about injury prevention, and just a little bit more about the running part of triathlon. So I will shut up and we can listen to the interview. Tom Hughes, welcome to the Cup of Triathlon podcast. It's nice to have you on.
Thank you very much.
Tell us a little bit about exactly what you do.
Okay, so what I tend to do is essentially running analysis. So it's a bit of a kind of a combination of gait analysis, looking at the kind of strength and conditioning side, and trying to work out why people run the way they do. The way that we run is often the way that we've kind of set our body up, or how our body has become set up with things like what we've been doing kind of in our daily lives, and then taking that and trying to put the runner in the kind of best position almost from that standpoint to allow them to run as much or as kind of fast as they want to. So trying to almost kind of reversing it based on the fact that we're not really looking at the kind of gait and the form side of things, but we're seeing how the body and how that's changed and how that has led to the kind of running form side of things, if that makes sense.
What's the difference then between teaching someone how to run and teaching their body how to run, which is basically what you do?
Yes. So if you were so a good example of this would be, I see a lot of people that are kind of essentially they're in a relatively sat position. So you look at them from the side and they're sat back a little bit. They tend to land in front of their centre of gravity, and then they sit back. So the pelvis sits down and back. And this tends to cause a lot of issues in terms of it puts a lot of overload on things like essentially the quads, because they're having to hold you in that position. It tends to deactivate the ability of the glutes and the back to actually hold you upright, and also keeps you on the ground for a lot longer, in that you have to wait until the pelvis moves over the top of that standing leg before you can bring that foot back off again. And also diminishes the ability to use the kind of bouncy elastic recoil that we actually have, the system we have in our lower leg and our foot that allows us to reuse a lot of energy. So when we waste and throw away a lot of energy, we sit back and then we wait until the pelvis moves over, and then we essentially push off again instead of allowing that recoil to work. Now, the key thing is that I see a lot of people in that same situation because they spend a lot of time driving and sitting and doing activities where they are in that sat position. The key issue is that if they then was to say to them, right, now you need to force yourself upright and try and get them as upright as possible and bring the pelvis forward. Now, they might get a certain way there, but they're likely to still be in that rotated pelvis position, simply because it's likely that there's dysfunction in the pelvis that's causing them to be in that position. And however much they want to think about it, however much they want to force that pelvis forward and be upright, they won't be able to actually get there without addressing those muscle imbalances.
I have literally just sat up straight so, while I'm on the interview with you, thinking, oh yes, I was very much slouching. So what can people actually do then? If the pelvis is such an issue, what can we do at home to try to, improve that?
Well, I guess the first thing I always say to people is trying to move more. I mean, that's at the end of the day, you can think about a lot of things, and we'll go through a few of the things that you can try and address the issue. But it's very much, if you're addressing an issue that is just every single time you're sitting and spending a good amount of time sitting, you're kind of creating the issue all over again. The best thing you can start off thinking about doing is, can I move more? So the key thing I have about this is that a lot of people now are moving, like they're at work and they're moving towards things like standing desks, which in theory can be a very good thing, get them up and moving a little bit more. But the key thing really is that they don't spend all the time in one position. The problem with things like office work, and it's the same problem I see with things like driving, is that we've created office chairs are very, very comfortable. They allow you to sit in the same position for a long period of time, and they also have a very deep position, and often the knees are higher than the pelvis. And what that then does is it causes that relatively acute pelvic kind of angle, but also just keeps us in that really kind of sat, essentially sedentary position for a very long time, and we don't really move around. One of the changes I get people to do often at work is, if you can't stand up, then get a kind of hard chair, a bit like a stool, because a hard chair where you have to perch on the edge, you're not going to want to stay in that position for very long. I use the idea of that McDonald's idea that apparently McDonald's chairs are designed that you can't sit in them for more than 20 minutes. So that you literally get 20 minutes, you get a bit of backache and you leave. And that idea is the fact that you have to shift around a lot. And I like the idea that when people do that at work, is that the worst thing you can do is sit in those big kind of black leather kind of office chairs. And it's the same thing with driving. I mean, those driving chairs and seats are designed for us to sit very deeply in and sit in that locked position for a very long time, often hours for some people, sat in traffic particularly. So that's the first thing, is trying to start to think about how can we move a little bit more, how can we almost fidget a bit more. Because every time we move around, we do our pelvis some good, or at least we don't do it the kind of bad side of things of sitting down locked. The issue is that a lot of people don't have that opportunity, so that's okay. But when they're at home, we tend to go. So a lot of people go from, they get up, they go, they sit in their driving seat, they go to work, they sit in their office chair, they drive home, they sit on the sofa. Again, similar position, in that kind of deep position, sat into the sofa. And that's to say, the problem with that is that it just means that you're getting a lot of issues with shortening at the front side of things. So the kind of hip flexor complex, everything is shortening. There's actually some evidence possibly related to things like blood flow. That actually sitting in that very deep seated position, we might actually be constricting some of the blood flow to the muscles and structures there, and that actually might be contributing to the damage. So that's something to bear in mind as well.
Interesting. So, I mean, a lot of runners probably, or even triathletes, a lot would complain of, I guess, knee problems is a common issue, isn't it? And things like shin splints, and then issues with the Achilles. Would you say a lot of that comes from higher up the body, i.e. that pelvis problem?
Yes, definitely. That's the thing. That's the funny thing, is that often we get the weak link takes the hit. The knee is a great example of this, in that I've rarely seen a knee problem that is a primary knee problem. In fact, I'm not really sure I've ever seen it. And the fact that it's almost always from lower down or higher up, and the majority of times it's from higher up. And it's from basically the way that the pelvis is moving and the way particularly the hips and things like the lateral stabilizers, so the big kind of glute medius that's on the outside of the hip, and the way that's controlling things. Because if you spend that lot of time sitting, we tend to find that glute medius, that big lateral stabilizer, is relatively inactive. Now, I don't really like the word weak very much, because I've used the word weak in my kind of past history as being something that as a result of things like nerve damage. So actual damage and actual problems that have caused the weakening of the muscle. I like kind of inactivated, because I believe that these muscles have the ability to be switched back on relatively quickly. Mm-hmm. But I think the thing, a lot of people have this issue with their lateral stabilizers. And what it then does is, every time you come into land, what you're asking, you're landing with a huge amount of weight and force. And you are then asking, you're landing on one leg, you're asking the whole of the pelvis to basically lock in position, to hold you in that position as you're balanced over that one relatively small surface area. You want it to keep the pelvis level, the whole of the other side of your body level, and you're asking generally that to happen from this pivot action on the outside of the hip that's landing. And the issue with that is that if that muscle's not really working properly, everything starts to go all over the place. So the hips and the pelvis start to move around. And what that then often causes is it puts a lot of load then on structures like the knee. So the knee drops inwards because it's not being controlled, and that tends to cause those knee issues. So the knee issue itself is being caused by the kind of essentially the hip not working properly. And then again, the same right down at the foot level. The majority of Achilles issues that I see come from the result of the hips being unstable over a period of time. Then, because the hips are unstable, we essentially we cross over. We bring the foot more into the center, because we can't use that lateral stabilizer. So we're kind of creating like a center pivot instead of having a kind of more the foot out to the side a little bit more.
Yep.
Because of that, we then cross over a little bit more. And when you add that in, particularly with shoes that have got a big heel wedge, you have an Achilles that's essentially landing at much severe angle. So as it's landing, the knee shoots over to the center. That means that there's a big torsional stress put on sides of the Achilles. Now, that brings us back to the kind of most Achilles issues are actually the sheath that's the problem. So they're not often the actual Achilles tendon. What tends to happen is the sheath and around the tendon gets inflamed. That gets damaged. That then causes blood vessels and nerves to grow into that. That's what tends to cause the pain. They then eventually grow in and damage the actual tendon itself. And that's where you get the long-term kind of Achilles tendinosis. The key thing is that sheath is very fragile to those torsional forces on each side. It likes landing in a relatively straight line, but it doesn't like it when it's landing at an angle and there's a massive amount of force. And you can imagine the knee moving inwards is a huge amount of force dragging across very quickly, and that pulls and damages all those structures.
So is this when it comes back to core strength and really making sure that as athletes we are strong enough, our body is strong enough to deal with everything that we put it under when we're training? Exactly.
I mean, that's the thing, is that core's become this word that it kind of become a bit of a buzzword. And the problem with buzzwords is they often then get taken almost out of context, is that you'll see core attributed to things like doing crunches and all that side of things, and essentially the word overused, but it is actually critical. That center portion of our body and how much we can control it is absolutely critical to the ability to then essentially stabilize and balance as we come into land and get back off the foot again. And the thing is, if we don't have that, then there can be huge amounts of problems. Now, the key issue when it comes to, you said about strength and that side of things, is that there's a distortion in that you often see, you look at, say, the kind of Kenyan athletes and the super lightweight distance runners. Now, they might not need to do much core work because they are so light and their limbs are so slender that they actually don't need a huge amount of strength around that center portion to hold their limbs in place. Whereas as you get bigger and you carry more muscle mass, and you basically need more core strength, and the majority of people don't have enough strength for the amount of mass that they carry in their limbs, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So what exercises then at home could people do maybe twice a week to improve their core, or is it very much particular to each person?
Well, that's the thing, is that when it comes to the core side of things, I tend to find that the majority of people respond very well to a certain key exercises. And the key, the one that is above all else is essentially variations on the deadlift. In that and it's a major problem I see in so many athletes, is they have a very strong and essentially what then becomes shortened front chain. So they're relatively strong, particularly the triathletes that have great cyclists, muscles, their quads and everything are relatively strong. So everything at the front chain becomes relatively strong, but their back chain, essentially the glutes, lower back and hamstrings, are relatively weak. Now that's the point. Relatively is really, really important. It's not to say our glutes are necessarily weak, our back is necessarily weak, but relative to what's happening at the front, it is weak. And in order to, if it's basically out of balance, that's what causes a lot of those issues with essentially that sitting posture. That the glute and the back strength are not strong enough to bring you back up into line and essentially provide balance to the body. Now, what I tend to do is I tend to discourage most athletes who I work with initially from doing anything like squats, anything on the front chain, until they are doing the kind of essentially the extension work and the back chain. And I tend to work on a 3-to-1 ratio of deadlifting and the back chain side of things 3 times as often as they're doing things at the front. And that tends to bring them back into balance. And quite interestingly, the Leeds Rhinos, the Rugby League club,
Yep.
They are fantastic on their strength and conditioning side, and it's something that I'm actually slightly involved in now with essentially their head of sports medicine. And interesting, when we talked about this, he said that's exactly what they've been doing with them for the last few years. It seemed to reduce their injury risk, and that they all do a lot of deadlifting and very little squatting, because they would find that when they were doing too much squatting, particularly as there was a bit of an ego thing with squatting seemingly than there wasn't with deadlifting, that they were basically getting very, very strong at the front and having imbalance issues because they weren't strong enough at the back chain, and their deadlifts and that side of things weren't as strong as they should be. So they then employ almost the same ratio, is that they tend to deadlift multiple times a week, whereas squatting is used relatively infrequently. So what you're saying about kind of working at home is actually, I tend to prescribe a video that I really like all my athletes to have a go at doing, and it's something called foundation training. And it's a guy in the States called Eric Goodman, I think his name is, and he's come up with this, there's a fantastic video, it's about 10 minutes long on YouTube, of him going through just a kind of a foundation training sequence. And essentially, the whole 10 minutes, you're spending a lot of time in the kind of top part of the deadlift position. So it's kind of, but you're not sitting forward over, you're almost kind of balancing and sitting back over your ankles, in that you don't drop yourself forward and allow the knees to collapse forward. You've almost got the shins straight, and therefore are sitting back behind the ankles, requiring a lot of glute and back activation. And it is fantastically powerful at getting the back and glute complex switched on and getting you upright. And I've used it in lots of different applications. I've used it personally. I use it every time before I go for a long run, because when I use it before I go for a long run, I feel more upright, I feel more controlled, and I feel more balanced. Essentially, it's all about getting that glute and back complex switched on. And I find that this works fantastically well. It takes 10 minutes to go through this whole sequence, can be done in your living room, and is an easy add-in to almost any training regime.
Let's talk a little bit about the actual mechanics of running. And one interesting thing is cadence when it comes to running.
For most people, they tend to fit around that 180 or above. That's the thing, is it's not necessarily a number as in like you should be around that, because it's actually more of most people, when they move towards that, they go over a threshold. And it all has to do with the elastic recoil system in the lower leg. And the best analogy I can use of this really is that you're trying to think of a spring, and the fact that when you want to get the most out of essentially a spring is you charge it, you push it down for just the right amount of time, and then you release it. You release that energy that you've essentially pushed into that spring. Now, if you take that same spring and you push it down, and then you slowly raise your hand up off the spring to slowly release the energy, it doesn't go anywhere. It releases the energy slowly, it dissipates it, and there's no sudden release of energy and push back into the ground. Same goes for if you throw the spring at the ground without pushing it down, it'll bounce a little bit, but it won't bounce as high as if you charged it for that right amount. Now, that's how the kind of lower leg works. It is a spring system. If you were to, I see all these running robots, you're always trying to create a robot that can run. And the way that you want to create a robot that can run is you make it out of elastic bands and springs, because that is what the lower leg is like. And the key thing is what you're wanting to do is you're wanting to land, charge that system, and then release it again. And actually, I mean, these numbers are based on kind of dissection, actually using the tissues of the Achilles. But it could be that gives up to 40+% of energy back in. So when 40% of energy placed into it, it can give back out as energy, which is quite incredible. It's also the reason that I've often seen a kind of separation between runners, in that you tend to have the faster runners that use elastic recoil that have a faster cadence, and essentially the slower runners with a slower cadence that don't use elastic recoil, and they are much slower. So they're kind of much slower for the same kind of size and weight and VO2 max and all that side of things, because they're not using that reuse of energy. Now, the key thing comes back to cadence, is that it's all about having just the right cadence. That as you land, as you charge that spring, as the heel drops down, you then get that release. And that, for most people, at their kind of what would be a kind of their race speed, i.e. they're kind of not jogging along, that tends to fall around the 180 mark. Now, for someone like Mike, I use myself as a good example. I've got a 37-inch inseam, so relatively long legs, very long Achilles, very long lower leg, and my optimal cadence is about 178, and I've got relatively long legs. I've worked with quite a few guys that have got relatively short legs and are kind of mid 5 footish, and some of them will be up around the 200 mark for the same feeling. So when you get that kind of almost that stiffness and that bounce and that feeling, they suddenly feel, they can feel the cadence naturally. It just happens naturally, and often, as I say, it relates to that lower leg length. It's not completely exact, but often has that relationship to it. So that's the key things, that it tends to start at 180 and go above. So most people can find basically a good marker if you want to know if you're not using elastic recoil. If you measure your cadence and you're in the 160s, you're not using it. It's the system is, everything is going to be released too slowly to actually gain that elastic energy. You're just dissipating it. And the funny thing is that dissipation can actually send more shock to your muscles, to your joints, than actually reusing it. Even though it feels like you're kind of almost running easier, or that you're running with less shock because you kind of get less of that impact shock, you're actually absorbing more of it as opposed to reusing it, and you're kind of giving it back out.
So then is it about, if you do have a cadence of around about 160 or something, is it then trying to sort of do quicker feet, essentially?
Well, that's the thing. This is where the argument comes, and this is one argument I've always had, is that I don't really believe people should kind of try and increase their cadence kind of abnormally. Because often what happens, there's a reason why their cadence is slower. Now, the key thing is going back to what we were talking about before, about where their pelvis is positioned and where they're landing. If you're landing in front of your centre of gravity, which a lot of people are because of that sat position, because they tip the head forward, the head is really heavy. If you tip the head forward, you sit the pelvis back, because you have to then offset the weight around the centre of gravity. And that's one of the key things. If I can get anyone to do anything for their running form, the first thing, head up, look forward. Get a side-on picture of Alistair Brownlee, and you will see what head position really looks like. Head over the shoulders, over the pelvis, direct straight line. If you can get that position, you've done half the work. So that's the first thing, is trying to get people landing, because if you're landing in front of your pelvis, you can imagine, the analogy I use is a pogo stick. If you're throwing that pogo stick at the ground just in front of you, it's going to bounce straight back. That's going to send all that shock and energy back into you. So if you're going to try and increase your cadence at that situation, you're not going to use that elastic recoil. All you're going to do is tire yourself out. Because as you increase cadence, so if they go from 160s, and this is why I tend to see people go into that group, is that if they don't use elastic recoil, they drop right down to 160s. I barely ever see anybody around 170. almost never do I never record a 170 cadence. It's either 160s or high 170s to 180s. It's because if you drop the cadence down and you're not using elastic recoil, it becomes essentially feels more efficient and more comfortable. But if you try and force that cadence up when you're landing in front of the torso, all you're going to be doing is sending more shot back into that pelvis and actually become less efficient. Because until you tip over the point where you can use elastic recoil, you won't be able to gain that efficiency. Now, what people tend to find is they try and force the cadence up and they hit the kind of 170s, and they find it really tiring. Because if you're sat back and you've got a relatively kind of collapsed pelvis and you're in kind of essentially that sat position, it gets really hard to get off the ground quick enough to enable a faster cadence. So you literally just can't get, because if you're trying to, so let's say you're landing with a slow cadence in front of your center of gravity, and if you want to get the foot back off the ground to achieve a 180 cadence, your pelvis is behind your foot, so you can't do it. You'll fall back. So you have to wait. The reason the cadence is slow is because you have to wait until the pelvis moves over the top of the foot before it can come back off the ground again. And that's the key thing. So it all comes down to where that weight bearing point is, not on the foot you're landing, whether your heel striking or anything on that side of things. Where, when you're bearing weight, is it beneath the pelvis? And if it's beneath the pelvis, you can get back off the foot quickly again. And that's what encourages that faster cadence. So that needs to be addressed first. Once that is addressed, you can then, if you've still got a slow cadence, it might be that you've just got used to having a slow cadence. That's the point at which you'd start to think about doing quicker feet, using a metronome, using something that can artificially help you try and pick that cadence up and understand what it feels like to have a faster cadence.
Now, Tom, you've been looking at some videos of me running.
Yes.
What have you found then?
Okay, so firstly, we had a little bit of a chat, didn't we, about your injury, so that side of things. So you just briefly give us a quick summary so we can kind of relate everything back to that side of things.
Yeah, sure. So my foot was hurting, so my right foot on the bottom, on the left-hand side, sort of towards the heel, and it's almost like you can pinpoint where the pain is. It didn't hurt when I was running. It would sometimes hurt after I ran. It would very much hurt first thing in the morning. And I've been working with a physio who has been doing some strength and conditioning training with me because he says it relates back to my hip.
Well, firstly, you have a very good physio. That's the first thing to say, is that you have a physio who has gone from what sounds like plantar fasciitis type pain, i.e. plantar fasciitis being used as a broad term for pain underneath that bottom part of the foot, and it's been related back to the hip, which is absolutely fantastic, because 99% of the time it'll be the problem itself will be addressed directly, symptom control, but not really thinking about where the pattern of injury is coming from. Everything that I look at is patterns. Everything I look at is where things might be originating from, where the kind of root cause is, but also what then leads on to the next thing. So when it comes to that plantar fasciitis or that kind of pain under the foot, what we can basically generally deduce is that the structures, the fibrous tissue structures, are being overloaded, or they're being asked to do a job that is more than they're normally asked to do. And the reason they are often asked to do that job is if the muscles that are controlling the structures like the arch aren't working as well as we want them to work, or there's an abnormal stress and energy coming in that is just way beyond something we can control. Now, the key thing, so thinking back about that, is that so we have to work out why that's the case. I mean, it sounds, because you're getting the pain in the morning, because you're getting the pain after you run, it definitely sounds like those fibrous structures. Now, the key thing is that in order for the foot to work and function well, we have to land in essentially the right way, relatively, not completely flat, slightly supinated, which is where the bottom of the foot is turned slightly in. We land and we control the movement with the forefoot and the midfoot working kind of in kind of combination with each other to control the movement. As we slowly, essentially touch down with that forefoot, we feel the ground. We pronate, and pronation is really important. This idea of trying to stifle and control pronation is really not a very good thing. Is that normally pronation is the amount of pronation is there, is often, if it's working properly, is what you need to bring everything back into line again. Now, you can imagine that if you're landing, you're coming across the body a little bit more because your hip's not really functioning, as we said before. If your hip on the outside isn't functioning and you're crossing over it more because you need to create that center pivot, we're now landing a bit more of an angle. Now, if we're landing at that angle, it's likely those muscles of the lower leg that control the arch aren't going to be able to work properly anymore, in that they're not at the angle that they like to work in. They're not going to be able to stabilize that arch. And what we're going to do is we're going to land and we're going to move very rapidly across. Now, I had a look at your videos. So what the couple of key things I picked out from your video, one was the right hip. You're totally right. The right hip and the lateral stabilizer, the glute medius, is not functioning properly. And we've got some pictures and we're going to put them up on the website to demonstrate what these kind of key moments. But as you come into land on that right foot, the left side of the pelvis is dropping down very rapidly, and that's essentially because it's not being kept up by that pivot system on the right side. The knee is also coming, probably the most pronounced thing we can see is the right knee suddenly shoots across, moving inches across, essentially underneath your body. And what that then does is it puts those lower leg muscles in a completely different position. And what we find is if that happens, those muscles all just switch off. And we can actually see that your arch and everything on that whole complex also drops inwards. So if your arch complex is dropping inwards, it's not because you're doing something or you're not in the right shoes or all those sort of things. It's because those muscles aren't switching onto control. Now, the reason they're not switching onto control, in your case, looks like is that because of that landing position, for one. The second bit is that your right foot particularly, is rotated slightly outwards. And that rotation can either be coming from the hip, an external rotation from the hip, or what's called a kind of torsional rotation that comes from basically between the knee and the foot in terms of the hamstring connections and all that sort of things can actually, because you've got the femur, your hip, essentially the thigh bone, and it comes down to the knee, and then you've got the knee, essentially the bones down to the foot, and then all those muscle structures, now they can essentially create, you can twist those side to side. If you were to completely relax, you can twist that side to side because essentially that is those two structures aren't locked together. They are allowed to twist side to side, but it's all those essentially the tension that's keeping everything in line. Now, what it looks like is that you've got a bit of combination of both. You've got a bit of rotation out from the hip, but also rotation in that lower leg from the back of the knee. Now, what that then means is if you come into land at that angle, but your force is going forwards, but your foot is pointing out, your arch is going to drop and collapse inwards. That's the first thing that's going to happen. And that arch collapsing inwards is going to basically suddenly overload all those soft tissue structures like the plantar fascia and all those essentially that fascia structure that's not designed to take that force over and over and over again. And it's likely that's been going on for a long time. And that suddenly the pain, this is why chasing pain becomes very misleading, is that this has probably been going on for years. And suddenly what's happened now is that all that inflammation, all that damage has irritated some of the nerves, and they're what's telling you it's painful.
That is what he told me the other day. He said it's to do with the nerves at the very end of those.
Exactly. Well, this is the funny thing is that I meet so many good physiotherapists and so many good people in my field, and you meet and then you're talking the same language, you're talking exactly the same things over and over again. And that's the key thing, is that it's understanding these patterns, and they all fit perfectly, and they all fit with that pattern of injury, and that's all essentially what happens. But that is what then guides us to how we sort things out. And almost the first thing to get out of anyone's head is pain. Pain is misleading. The amount of actual pain you're getting and that's the problem, is a lot of people have fear of rehabilitation because when they try and do anything, it hurts. And the key thing is they're letting the pain guide them as to whether they should be doing things rightly or wrongly, and what they need to think about is what we need to do is we need to go back up the body. We need to retrain the hip so that it's stable. We need to get the foot landing straight forward, either that through a hip mechanism or through that kind of torsional change that's going on in the lower leg. Once that happens, we're on the right track. Now, it might still be painful on the odd occasion, but we're on the right track. And as we improve the strength, it'll gradually get better. And actually, at the end of the day, it needs time. Anyone that comes to me that's got a good going Achilles tendon problem, I do a little bit of a sit down and I say, I'm really sorry, but this is going to take a very long time to heal. You're going to be rehabilitating this for at least a year. But you have to buy into it, and you have to do it now. You have to start it now. You have to be dedicated to it for the next year or however long. Sometimes it's 6 months. The key thing is that foot injuries and ankle, they don't go overnight. They just need time, but they need time when we're doing the right things. We are doing all the right things every day. And once we've retrained things, we keep doing the right thing, and that keeps on healing things, in that it doesn't create the problem again, and allows us to actually restructure. And actually, the more we then run on the right things, the more we run in the right way, the better and faster we get at restructuring that whole system. So that heals the injury faster. However, if we continue to go out there and cause the same issue over and over again, then we essentially end up going round in circles and it will never heal. And we end up with very, very long-term problems that become really, really difficult. All is not lost at all, but the quicker we start things, the better things are going to become.
Tom, it's been absolutely fascinating, and I know we're going to try and put the videos up on oxygenaddict.com and hopefully on social media as well, so you can have a look at exactly how poor my running form is. But no, Tom, it's been really, really interesting, and I think there's so much that everyone can take away from this talk, including about the, you were saying about the head, and if you can keep that sort of straight, then that is a big part.
Or go to, if you're going to do one change when you run proud. Run proud. Run with your head up, looking forward, open up the chest, take some big deep breaths in. And one little trick for that, I just want to add in, if you want to learn what proper posture is, try breathing through your nose.
So that is Tom Hughes, and if you want any more information, then check out his website, which is www.trimechanics.co.uk.
I love how you put the www dot as though you're explaining it to my grandma. This is how you work a web page, Grandma. Yes. Did you go and see him in person, or did you video yourself and send him the video?
Yeah, sent him the videos. But you can obviously go and see him. He's based in Headingley, which is like Leeds.
But you can also send like online videos over, and
I don't know. I would say get in touch with him.
Okay.
I would say it is more sort of going.
It's more like an in-person thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
But
I'm gonna go check the website out after this.
You can do remote analysis. You can do that, and that would be a case of sending him, sending some videos across. I'm just looking at the website now, so yeah, you can. It's just a different perspective, isn't it? So really fascinating. Yeah. And basically learning to run better and faster with less effort.
That's cool. And do you feel like it's helped you, like, style wise and injury wise and things like that?
Well, as we sort of said in the interview, that I have been seeing a physio for a while now, and I'm working on strength and conditioning more with him. So my foot is definitely hurting less.
Great.
And I know that, and you'll be able to see, I think we're going to put the videos up, aren't we, on the website? So,
yep.
So other people, because it's quite difficult to kind of picture perhaps what I do, but if you go to the oxygenaddict.com/podcast, then the videos of me running are going to be up there, and everyone's different, but you can see it straight away, some of the issues that we talk about in that, about what I do, and then so I can absolutely appreciate that, it all comes from my right hip, and that's weak, and I need to strengthen it, but because then it impacts further down the leg, and yada, yada, yada. So
yeah, sure.
It is interesting. So yeah, check it out.
Interesting stuff. Right, we're going to have to wrap this up soon. So just before we do, we've got a coach's couch question, which I think we need to do, and then we can wrap it up and let these guys go.
Absolutely. Well, this one's come in from, we don't really know who, anonymous. So here it is. The question is simple, Rob. How can I get faster if my coach only lets me run 5k pace, or like 8-minute miles, basically?
5-minute K pace.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the question here is, this is from one of my athletes that I coach that's been anonymized to protect the guilty. Because it's one of those, like, I want to run faster, I want to get fast, so I want to run fast. And it kind of makes sense, doesn't it, that when you come into it, you think you need to run hard and you need to run faster in order to get fast. That's what most people think, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to get into people's heads is this idea that this is specifically for training for Ironman. The best way to do this is to do the majority of your hard work on the bike, and that's going to increase the fitness of your heart and lungs, and that top end fitness that's done on the bike. And then running wise, what we really need to do is condition your body to be able to take the beating of running for a long distance when you're tired, And to be able to do that, that's the fitness that you want to increase in terms of getting better at an Ironman marathon. You probably don't have to run any faster than you're shooting to run for on Ironman marathon day in order to build the fitness to do that in your Ironman marathon. So rather than going out and running like a runner does and doing really hard track intervals and doing tempo runs, and you end up with this week that has 3 or 4 hard run sessions in like a runner might do, what I encourage all my athletes to do is to run slowly for the vast majority of the time. And slowly means like that kind of slower than e-pace Ironman marathon type pace. So it's not even marathon pace. This is slower than that. The idea is that the fitness you're going to build up is durability. Your body's going to be able to recover, and it's going to be able to bounce back faster and accept more run training, because week in and week out you're doing the running at that pace. The big danger, of course, Hells, if you're running hard, is what?
Well, then you can't recover.
You can't recover, and you're going to maybe pick up injuries. That's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah.
So all it needs to be is that steady run all the time. You don't need to go out and smash yourself, and you particularly don't go out and need to do a hard medium length tempo run of like 75 to 90 minutes very often. Even if you've got a marathon come in as part of your build up to your Ironman marathon, probably the worst thing you can do for your Ironman later on in the season is try and run a marathon hard 10 weeks out from your Ironman, because you're just going to wreck yourself for the next 2 weeks and you're not going to be able to get any meaningful training done at all. I think running that marathon at a sensible pace and taking walk breaks and getting around it, thinking, right, I want to be somewhere in the ballpark of the time I want to run in my Ironman, well, that's really good preparation. But smashing yourself in an actual marathon probably isn't very good preparation at all. It's going to take too much time out to recover.
So basically, if you're doing your runs too hard, then just like slow it down, essentially, is what we're saying, isn't it?
Chill out, basically. You don't need to train like a runner. You need to train just to get your body used to running at that kind of speed and cadence you're going to be doing at Ironman race day. And even for the rock stars like Paul Burton, running if you want to run a 3:15 marathon, that's still only just under 8 minute miling, isn't it? Sort of 7:45, 7:40 miling.
Yep.
So it's just not that fast in terms of run pacing.
Rob, can I just throw a little question in there? What about if you're doing a sprint triathlon?
If you're doing a sprint triathlon, the advice would be completely different.
Great.
So let's be absolutely clear. The advice I've just given is for someone training for an Ironman.
Good.
Yeah?
Just wanted to just make sure that was...
We need to make sure that we're training at the paces appropriate to what you're going to be racing at. So the answer there was only aimed at people who are training for an Ironman. And even that the advice holds true for people training for half Iron distance races as well.
Fantastic. There you go. I just had to make sure that one was clear, that it was for the Ironman people who are doing an Ironman. If you do have a question for Coach's Couch, which we like to do pretty much every week, then do get in touch. You can either tweet us, we're at Cup of Tri on Twitter, or you can email Rob, which is Rob?
Coach Rob Wilby at oxygenaddict.com.
There we go.
All right, we're going to leave it there for this week. Thanks very much for listening, everybody. Our sponsors have been oxygenaddict.com, raceforce.co.uk, and wearebikehouse.co.uk. Thanks very much for listening. I'm Coach Rob Wilby.
I'm Helen Murray.
And you've been listening to the Cup of Tri Triathlon podcast. Tune in next week for an interview with Matt Botchwell. Bye now.